Hello, Bill.
Hi, Craig. How are
It
you?
is lovely to see you again. You're looking fabulous.
Well, back at you. Thank you. It's nice to be with you.
How is this a cause for a celebration? Over 60 years in showbiz.
Yeah, it's been a good long run so far. I think I've had a Screen Actors Guild union card since I was 5. I worked on a film on camera this week. You would be amazed, or maybe not, but these non-disclosure agreements that you have to sign for all of these projects now are stunningly different from the way things used to be. So I can't be specific, but I worked on camera in a film recently, just last week. I have 2 different animated projects that I'm working on that are in various forms of release, getting close to it. So yeah, I'm still working.
Take me back to when you were 4 and you were dressed up as Zorro, jumping about on your bed, and you take a fall. And amazingly, Bill, that kind of led you to a life in showbiz.
Well, that's true. I always consider that my lucky break, if you will. It was the 50s, 1958. And West Los Angeles, sunny California, middle-class neighborhood on a cul-de-sac with kids my age, and almost every house was pretty idyllic. And Zorro, starring Guy Williams from Lost in Space, eventually, of course, and also the program Superman with George Reeves, both of them with capes and adventurers and kind of, heroic stuff. It just hit me so passionately, like a religion. I was an only child. I was very energetic, as most 4-year-old kids are. Believe me, I have a 4-year-old granddaughter, and yeah, energy comes with the package just in general. But I was playing Zorro. I was dressed up in my Zorro costume. I was bouncing on the bed of our guest bedroom, and I jumped off the bed and I landed on a toy Winchester rifle, which was made out of really good steel in the 50s. And I cracked my leg right in half. I mean, it was a big break. I was in a cast for almost 3 months. So I couldn't run around on the cul-de-sac with all of my friends for quite a while. I just had to sit and be patient in a cast. And while I was doing that, I was glued to the television set every day. Of course, there was no DVR or any internet or YouTube, or you had to wait for your favorite programs to come on. Mm-hmm. And one of mine was the Mickey Mouse Club, which was on every day. And I would watch Spin and Marty and Zorro, and then I would switch over to Superman. And I just was receiving this signal that that's what I had to do. I had to get in, and I remember using the words, I had to get inside the television set and be like Zorro or Superman. And kind of happened.
And I think that happened, if I'm not wrong, on Romper Room. You were a doobie, weren't you?
Yeah, I was a doobie. My mother was pretty smart, and she had worked at 20th Century Fox Studios for over a decade before she married my dad. And her father, my grandfather, Harry Gould, had been a very successful agent in the 1930s. He had mostly represented writers and directors, but he also represented some actors. And Boris Karloff was his most famous on-camera client. And my grandfather had gotten Boris Karloff the audition for Frankenstein, and he had negotiated that deal for him. My grandfather had passed away before I was born. I always felt connected to him, but obviously I never met him. But the point was, my mom's side of the family wasn't intimidated by the film industry or show business in general. It was just the local business, and they had worked in it. So when I had this energy and demand and passion to do it myself, my dad said to my mom, well, if you go with him, and if it's a positive experience, go ahead, check it out. So the first thing my mother did was she booked me on Romper Room. So she signed me up, particularly to see how I would react and behave under the lights with the cameras in front of me, taking a little direction. And I thrived in that environment as a 4-year-old. I stayed for a couple of weeks, and most of the the kids in the school on Romper Room. They came and went after a few days, sometimes a whole week, but I stayed for a couple of weeks. So my mom realized, okay, well, he's cute, he's precocious, and he's got red hair and freckles. They like that. So then we got an agent, and 64 years later, I'm talking to you about it.
So tell me, Bill, what was your first professional job?
It was on an episode of a CBS television series drama show starring Darren McGavin called Riverboat.
Oh, yes.
And I don't remember much about it. It was a one-day gig. I think I had one line. I don't have it on, video or anything, but it was fun. I had a good time. And I had done a few print ads. I don't know really how that manifested when I think about that now, but before I was on camera, they had booked me a couple of like print ads in magazines and things, and that was never what I wanted to do. I didn't complain about it, but what I wanted to do was, be Will Robinson, because Will Robinson was a superhero. To me, he really was. He was always rushing into danger to save the day. He had a laser gun and he literally used it, which is pretty cool considering the era. He could program the robot. He was exactly what I wanted to be.
But before then, you were the second Darren on Bewitched. And a lot of people might be thinking, hang on, there was Dick York, there was Dick Sargent. There was never Bill Mumy as a Darren, but actually you were.
That's right. It's a good Trivial Pursuit question.
Yes.
And it's absolutely true that is one of my very favorite gigs. I had done the Christmas show of the first season of Bewitched, and it was a great part. And I played an orphan that was kind of cranky and didn't believe in Christmas or Santa Claus. And Samantha reveals herself to me as a witch and takes me to the North Pole to meet Santa Claus, which was played beautifully by Cecil Kelley. And it was a real nice episode, but I was in love with Elizabeth Montgomery. This is going to sound a little weird, but this is really the truth. We know who we are sometimes from a very young age. And when I was 8 years old, I worked with Shirley Jones, beautiful blonde, right? And I just spoke to her twice last week on her birthday, and I had lunch today with her son, Shaun. But I fell in love with Shirley. She was just so beautiful. And I literally cried. I wanted to marry her when I was 8 years old. Wrapped up a movie called A Ticklish Affair with Shirley Jones, went right into another movie, fell madly in love with Connie Stevens, another beautiful blonde. Yes. Who just, won my heart instantly. I spoke with Connie less than a decade ago. We were together at an event. And we laughed about all of that and took a picture together. She's a doll. But I fell in love with these two blondes. And then I went and did the Bewitched, and I fell more in love with Elizabeth Montgomery than I had been with Shirley or Connie. She just was so special to me. She taught me how to do the little Samantha nose twitch. And I just loved working with her. So when the opportunity came, the next season to play Darren as a child, they put a dark rinse in my hair. And I had watched that show so regularly and passionately that I really had studied Dick York. And if you watch that show, it's called Junior Executive. And if you see it, I did a pretty good job being a little Dick York. And I just love that show, but mainly because I got to be her husband and get a kiss from her. And as soon as we wrapped that up, I went to France in a 20th Century Fox feature film called Dear Bridget, starring opposite James Stewart, the great Jimmy Stewart. And then I fell in love with Bridget Bardot. And I was the first American actor to get an on-screen kiss from Bridget Bardot. So those four blondes, right? That's pretty powerful stuff.
What was the great Agnes Moorehead like? Because I know she was responsible for turning you into the young Dick York as Darren Stevens. I mean, the red hair, was she a formidable person?
Yes, similar to Jonathan Harris in a bigger than life personality. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit. What's true about Jonathan is that's who he really, really was as a true person. He was that person, and don't you forget it. Mind your manners or you'll lose your friends. It is I himself, the great himself, and don't you forget it. Whereas I can't say that Agnes Moorehead, when the cameras weren't rolling, was walking around with that same bombastic kind of character. But she was a fabulous actress, and I enjoyed working alongside her and watching her work very much because, boy, I mean, you know, that makeup with the eyebrows and the, it was quite a character, Endora, and she did a classic job, of course.
What was the Agnes Moorehead you got to see, like the one that most of us would never have the opportunity to?
Well, you know, to be honest with you, Craig, when I wasn't on set rehearsing or working, I had to be shuttled back off into a trailer, you know, right outside the stage door, and get 3 hours of school education in every day. So, and later on things like Lost in Space, man, that was a difficult thing to balance. But on an episodic, like when I was just doing a guest shot on Bewitched for like 4 days or something like that, you know, it's just the nature of the beast. So most of my off-camera time was, you know, okay, we got to get, you had to get 20-minute minimum increments at a time for on stage acting education. So what would happen is they would say, okay, cut, print, Billy, go to school. And the second assistant director would escort me out to the trailer where some teacher would be sitting there with a lesson plan. And the second AD would look at his watch, and I'd be sitting in there having to shift my consciousness from, okay, I got 3 pages to do in a half an hour where I'm going to cry, or I'm going to do something dramatic, or I'm thinking about my lines. I had to push that aside and start thinking about math or geography or history, or, you know, whatever it was, whatever subject it might have been. I had to switch over completely and change to that focus for a minimum of 20 minutes. And oft times it would just be 20 minutes. And the assistant director at 20 minutes would knock on that little aluminum door, take me back out to the set where I would readjust my focus and get back into the acting job that I was there to do.
That's quite a lot of weight to put on a young kid's shoulders.
Well, it was what I wanted to be doing in terms of acting. I do want to clarify again the fact that my mom and dad, they invested the money I made. They didn't need the money that I made as an actor for their life. And so they invested it pretty well for me. And if we had a family vacation or something that was planned, my dad had a boat when I was a youngster, and we'd go to cruises and stuff on his boat, go to Catalina Island for the weekend or 5 days or something. If we had a planned vacation and a gig was offered to me, more than often we would pass on it. I remember specifically being offered, I had done one episode of Ben Casey, which was a medical show. And I remember we had a trip planned, and I was offered another episode of Ben Casey, and they said, no, we're going to take our vacation. We're not going to do that one. So I don't want to, you know, there's no sob story here. My parents didn't make me do any of that stuff, but I liked it. But it was hard doing that school trampoline thought thing back to acting and back to school. I never liked that. I never really liked that. And you know, when you're doing a guest shot, you just have to deal with it for a few days. You might not know the teacher, she might not know you, or you might have worked with the teacher several times on another show, and it would be a little more amicable. Once we got to Lost in Space, and I had such a heavy workload, the teachers tended to be a little more empathetic with me needing a bit of a cool down. Yes. You know, they'd send me back into the trailer, and I would just sit there and go, okay, wait, yeah, I know I'm supposed to do longitude and latitude, but I got to go save the Robinsons in 20 minutes. Let me just chill out for a minute. And they were better about that.
Little known fact, you could have been Eddie Munster. Of course, the role went to your very great friend, Butch Patrick, but you could have been wearing a widow's peak and the werewolf's ears if circumstances had have been right, if the stars had have aligned. Is that right?
Well, the stars aligned, and I chose, along with my family and my agent at the time, to say thank you, but no thank you. I was really working a lot at that particular time when the Munsters was being cast or the pilot was being filmed, and I had the opportunity to go from like starring in a Disney movie to going into a sitcom like a Bewitched or an Ozzie and Harriet or something, and then going into a Western, and then going to another movie or a Twilight Zone or all these different types of roles. And it was really wonderful as an actor to have that eclectic opportunity to really work in so many different arenas and styles. I didn't like the idea of having to go through all that makeup, because I knew we knew he was going to be a werewolf boy, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, there's going to be a wig or a widow's peak, or they're going to dye my hair, or I'm going to have to go through all this stuff. And it just didn't. And it also, quite honestly, and Butch did a great job, and he honors that role to this day. But it didn't seem like it was going to be the leading character in that series. Bottom line is, if I had accepted the role of Eddie Munster, I would not have been able to accept the role of Will Robinson, because those shows crossed in terms of when the Munsters was still on the air when Lost in Space started. So I wouldn't have been able to do Lost in Space, which was absolutely exactly everything I had ever wanted to do. I did guest star on one episode of The Munsters with Butch, so it worked out.
1965, you were 10, and along comes Lost in Space. And from that little boy of 4 jumping up and down in capes on the bed and breaking your leg and all of that, you must have thought you were in nirvana when they had you in that spacesuit and in the spaceship and working with such an amazing cast.
It was actually 1964 when Lost in Space was cast. We started filming the pilot, I think, January 1st of 65. So in December of 64, they had offered me the role. We had negotiated the deal. I had read the script. It was exciting. It was a 20th Century Fox, first of all, which was literally 4 minutes from my house by car. I used to ride my bicycle there when I wasn't working, but I was going to school. Literally, I would ride my Schwinn Stingray from my house right to the 20th Century Fox gate and wave at everybody and just go to school when we were on hiatus. It was so close to my house. It was so wonderful to be able to work. I could go home for lunch if I wanted to. It was just so close. It was great. I didn't know when we accepted the project, I didn't know that Zorro was going to be my dad. That was quite an added bonus. And of course, Angela and I were super close, and all of the cast bonded spectacularly, like a real family, when we shot the pilot. And I have to say, here we are, 57 or whatever it is years later, and we're still very close. I mean, I call Mark Goddard. He lives across the country. I call Mark every couple of weeks, and we have a good long chat. And I see Marta once in a while. Angela and I talk at least once a week. I reach out to June, who's 97, on her birthdays and Mother's Day and stuff. And she's doing okay. I mean, it's not like June and I go out to the Whiskey A Go-Go anymore, but we did.
She was a great David Bowie fan. I think for some reason in my head, there's a little bit of trivia that said that June would carry around a photo of David Bowie. Is that right?
She was enamored with David Bowie. And I won't say she is a real rock and roller at heart. The image of June Lockhart from Lassie and Lost in Space and Petticoat Junction and General Hospital, all these things, is kind of this conservative, matronly, oh dear, oh now get back here, but in reality, June, who's brilliant, like genius level brilliant, but she's a rock and roll gal. She loves rock and roll music, and she loves rock and roll bad boys. And it's true. And I had done a film called Hard to Hold with Rick Springfield in like 1983, and Tony Sales, who's a fine musician, was also a musician alongside me in this movie. And Tony had been in a band with David Bowie called Tin Machine. And June heard about that and showed me this picture of Bowie in her wallet and wanted to know all about, Tony Sales' perspectives on thoughts on Bowie and everything. Her Bowie crush was legit.
Is this right, Bill, that the Lost in Space, when it first began, the vision was actually for a much darker series than eventually went to air, that the producers wanted something a little dark, and then it was thought that maybe that might terrify a lot of the younger viewers, and so they kind of lightened it up and added that campy value? Enter, with all of his fabulous flamboyance, the wonderful Jonathan Harris.
Well, it's partially true. The pilot was filmed without a Dr. Smith or a robot. Mm-hmm. The series was pitched and sold as an adventure science fiction series about this unit that is lost in space and dealing with unknown alien threats. And that pretty much is what the first 6 or 7 episodes that aired were. However, the network, which in my opinion rarely inserts great notes, inserted 2 great notes. One was they should have a robot, right? So that was a great note, and our robot was designed and created by Robert Kinoshita, who also designed the classic Robbie the Robot from Forbidden Planet, the science fiction classic film, and it's a wonderful prop. To this day, it looks great, right? So that was a great note. They should have a robot. And then they also said, they're all too nice, right? They're a happy unit here. They need a foil. Otherwise, it's just going to be every week. It's too hot. It's too cold. There's a comet coming. It's a meteor, or maybe it's a weird alien, because we didn't get into too many weird aliens at the beginning of the series, actually. And they were smart about that. So they added the character of Dr. Smith, who gets trapped at liftoff when he's on board sabotaging the mission. If you remember, the original character of Colonel Dr. Zachary Smith, he was a nefarious, dark villain and a foreign agent working for some undisclosed agency called Aeolus 14 Umbra, right? Aeolus 14 Umbra, do you know where I am? And so what they did was they took the pilot and they cut it into the A story of the first 5 episodes. Then they wrote the B story of Dr. Smith, and we filmed that alongside what they kept from the pilot. And that's the first 5 episodes that were broadcast. And it's pretty serious, dark stuff. I mean, we had this incredible score and theme song by John Williams, which is so dramatic and moving and emotional. We had a brilliant cinematographer named Gene Polito, who shot this in black and white, that holds up looking like a 1930s Universal horror film. It's beautifully lit and stuff. The first season is a magnificent example of black and white television. And after about 6 or 7 episodes aired, the network started getting a lot of mail, and this is true, saying that this show is scaring our kids. This show's, because they aired it in the family hour, which was early. It was like 7 to 8 at night. And that's what CBS had dubbed the family hour. And they were indeed getting a substantial amount of, I'll say, complaints that it was too scary for their little kids. So the network mandated it to Irwin Allen, the creator and producer and director of the pilot, that the tone shift and get away from this scary stuff. So Irwin talked to Jonathan, and Jonathan was pretty much given carte blanche to turn the character of Dr. Smith from this really deadly dark guy into this comedic, self-indulgent, whining guy that you love to hate, right? And Jonathan seized that opportunity with great passion, because he had always said to us, well, at least he said to me, that there's no way that character, the original Dr. Smith, could have stayed on for years. They would have thrown him out the airlock, or he would have died or something. They would have killed him off. He was too dark to stay, and he obviously appreciated the gig. And nobody enjoyed Lost in Space or the job more than Jonathan. He just had so much fun every day. And in a very short amount of time, we were all amazed at how he really had carte blanche to rewrite every single Smith line. We would get our scripts, and then we would go to rehearse. And, instead of the line, "I don't think I shall accept that, Professor," if that was the line, suddenly it was like, "Hold on 1 second there. I refuse to accept the hypothesis that you would even insist of such a..." I mean, he would just take a single line and turn it into a paragraph. And we'd all just like go, wow. It got to a point where, because I had always memorized, the whole script before we started filming an episode. And so what happened was, when they called me to the set, this is from mid first season on through the end, they would call me to the set out of the school trailer, but they'd take me to Jonathan's trailer. And Jonathan would say, "Never mind the script. Here's how it's going to go." And he would, because I would have memorized my cues as they were written, right? Ready to deliver Will's retorts to Smith. And he would just say, no. Here's what I shall say. Then you shall deliver your line. Okay, Billy Person. He always called me Billy Person. Is that you? Do you have it, Billy Person? You got it? Good. And I would call him himself. I got it, himself. All right, Billy Person, let's go do it.
I remember him telling me that he and his wife Gertrude would sit up in bed at night, they'd get the scripts, and they would colour them all up, no end, almost technicolor, things like "you lily-livered, lead-lined lummox," and things like that. They'd sit there in bed competing with one another, having these rushes of blood as to what outrageous, fabulous alliteration that they could concoct as they sipped their hot cocoa.
Well, he might have told you it was hot cocoa, but I can tell you now it was Tanqueray gin.
What was he like? How would you describe him?
He loved himself. He created himself from whole cloth. The person he was born to be was not who he became, and who he became was legitimately who he was. And Gertrude, God rest her soul, the old hen, she was exactly like him. She was fascinating. She was brilliant. She was classy. She was beautiful. And she sparred with him and would not kowtow to him at all, which is why we never met Gertrude in the original days when the show was being filmed. His private life was pretty private. And then, of course, later in life, we became super close friends with both Jonathan and Gertrude. My wife Eileen and I, we would go to brunch, we would go to dinner, we would go to their house, we would meet at places, we would go to events together. And Gertrude was really magnificent. And I believe they were married for 64 years. There's this mindset, that Jonathan, or Dr. Smith, is this great gay icon. And in a way, he is this great gay icon, but he was still married to Gertrude for 64 years. And she called him John. She was the only person in the world that called him John. And we'd go to their house and she would say, "John, you need to fix these shelves." And I would go thinking like him with a hammer and nails. And she would go, "Oh yes, he's quite handy when I need him to be." They were a fantastic pair. And you could just sit there and, oh my God, they would entertain you without thinking they were doing so. Although Jonathan was also very aware of the fact that he could be extremely entertaining and hold tables for hours at a time, because the entire cast, thanks to Kevin Burns, who passed away a year ago. Kevin used to bring us all together for lunches at the studio where we had spent our time filming together. 30 years later, he would just have lunches with the entire cast, and he would then celebrate birthdays, and we'd go to restaurants together. And Jonathan would just hold court, and there would be times when he would tell stories that he had told 3 times before, but every time he told them, A, they were embellished just a little bit bigger, and B,
yeah.
they were fascinating, and he was just a great fun guy. And I'll tell you this, if Jonathan liked you, he loved you. If he really appreciated and liked you, he would bend over backwards to help you out and be generous and kind, and he'd walk the walk and not just talk the talk. And later, if he didn't like you, this is when he was closer to the end of his life, he never suffered fools, and he let people know it. I had to hold him back many times at conventions. Many times we would be on stage together at Q&As or panels at sci-fi conventions or something, and maybe it was after dinner, and then we'd had a cocktail or two, and he'd start, and I'd go, no, oh, the pain, stop it right there.
They say never meet your heroes because chances are you might be disappointed. So there you were at 4 years of age, absolutely worshipping Guy Williams, Zorro. And then not too many years later, there you are working with the great Guy Williams. How did you deal with that fabulous coincidence, the way in which the universe brought you together?
Of course, I told Guy the story, how I broke my leg, and that was basically my entryway into acting. And it was, of course, in homage to Zorro. But and you couldn't have been asked for a nicer guy or a more impressive human being than Guy. He was brilliant. He was smart. He was funny. He was ridiculously great looking, and he and I got along great. And I love our father and son scenes together. Da, 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 da. Great theme music there. Anyway, but by the time I was doing Lost in Space, let's basically say I was 11. I'd been working since I was 5, and I'd worked with so many huge stars. I don't need to name them, but I had worked with big, iconic movie stars and television stars. And beyond telling Guy that was my, segue into show business, I wasn't that, intimidated or anything by him. We got along great, but it wasn't. Yeah, I was just used to working with people that were legendary at that point in time.
Guy's passing, he was in his 60s? I think it was 1980.
65.
Yeah, 65. So young. What happened, Bill?
He was living alone in Buenos Aires, Argentina, because the government there worshipped him as Zorro. And when Lost, I think there was a bit of disappointment in Guy in terms of the way Lost in Space kind of became Jonathan's show and not his show. But again, I want to clarify, we never had bad vibes on set. And Guy and Jonathan, they didn't go to lunch together, but they were cordial and they were fine with each other. And I always point this out too. You get the same paycheck if you're working 2 days an episode or if you're working 7 days an episode. So Guy didn't complain about the fact, I think anyway, after Lost in Space, Guy returned to the Zorro celebrity, and he was very welcome down in South America, where he would do events as Zorro in the costume with the mask, and he was an excellent fenceman. And he would do appearances like that, and he was such a big celebrity, almost on the Elvis Beatles level down there, that the government gave him a lovely apartment in the marina, and he lived alone. His marriage here, I'm not sure if they ever got actually divorced, but he lived alone in Argentina, and his wife Jan is still alive, and she's a beautiful person. And his kids are my age, and they're great, and I like them both. But unfortunately, Guy had like an aneurysm and he passed away in his apartment, and it took like 5 days to find him, age 65. It was around then, 89, 90, that the cast reunited to do these huge events together. I remember we did a show in Boston together to celebrate the 25th anniversary, or something like that, 20th anniversary. I don't know what it was, but it was an anniversary, and we were all together in Boston. And there were like, 30,000 people there for us. And Guy would have just, I think he would have really been happy to know that his role as Professor John Robinson made a big difference in a lot of people's lives. And a lot of people chose to go into the sciences and stuff because of him. And we would have had a good time with Guy there.
Mark Goddard, you say you're still in touch. He's on the East Coast and so forth. Now, you write in your memoir, which I have to say is a ripper read, and we are coming to your memoir, that Mark was fond back in the day of a little martini at lunch, and that could make it for a fun afternoon of shooting. Make him a little cranky when it came to interacting with the great Dr. Smith. Would that be a fair assessment?
Mark is a prankster.
Yes.
And Mark has a fabulous sense of humor. And Mark is 18 years older than me. And he and I were almost like a little Batman and Robin together when we weren't on camera. He and I went to lunch together a lot. My mother loved Mark, but she would just, I could hear her just say, "Mark, I love you, but you're a fool." And she meant that in an endearing way, but he would just go off and do these ridiculous stunts and things. Look, this is the mid 60s. This is the psychedelic 60s. This is very small little important capsule of time when pop culture all over the world was changing. If you think about it, when Lost in Space started on the air, the Beatles were singing, I Feel Fine. And when we went off the air, it was the White Album. So, I mean, there was a lot of stuff going on in that era. Yep. Vietnam War protests, the whole bit, hippies, the beginning of all that. Anyway, a lot of people in the 60s and the 50s and the 40s in show business had cocktails at lunch. It wasn't rare or frowned upon. In today's world, I don't think people do that. But in the 60s, it was absolutely, you're going to lunch. Yeah, I'll have a martini. I'll have another martini. And so one day, one quick story about Mark's shenanigans. He and I used to go to this restaurant close to the studio, but off the lot, called Duke's. And it was a funky little place. And one day, Mark, he bought this big bag of peanuts. And all of a sudden, it's raining peanuts all over the set. This is messing up it's raining peanuts. And Stage 11 at 20th Century Fox, this is like an airplane hangar built in the 20s or 30s. It's way up there. And you go, what's going on? And Mark, who was 32, maybe 31 or 32 at the time, had climbed after a couple of martinis, had climbed up the ladder, the side of the stage, through the rafters. He's at the top level. He's going, here's your sock. Here's your peanuts, right? Get your peanuts here. Hey. And he was just throwing peanuts down at the crew. And you had to be there, I guess. But it was pretty good. let me turn my light on. It's getting a little dark in here. Sun's going down.
Yeah.
Better. The sun's starting to go down here. It's a little after. It's about 5:15 here. So anyway, I didn't want to fade away on.
Go into the dark. That's it.
Anyway, Mark's a crack up, and I love him dearly. And he's in very good shape. He and his wife Evelyn just returned from a cruise to Europe, and he's a wonderful guy. I love him like a brother.
Now, Jonathan Harris's death, and I think that bill was 2002. You were so close, but he was so larger than life. When you do his voice, it is like he is there with you, Bill. That's the amazing thing. There is just such an astonishing energy and such a dynamic change in you. I'm sure he's there saying, yes, he's doing me just fine.
This is indisputable. When Netflix did the new Lost in Space television series, I read the pilot script and I thought it was great. I loved the tone of the show because honestly, the tone of Lost in Space, the original series, Irwin Allen's original vision for the show, wasn't campy. It wasn't a joke. It was dramatic and science fiction, So when Netflix was doing the series, the pilot, and I read the script and I saw there's just this small bit in it where Parker Posey's Dr. Smith is revealed to not really be Dr. Smith. There's a real Dr. Smith, right? And I called the producers and I said, look, I don't know if you guys want to cross over with anything from the classic original series, but if you do, I would love to play this part as the real Dr. Smith, because I can tell you, Jonathan Harris is very loudly saying to in my head, well, if you can't get me, then get Billy. and they were so sweet. They were just like, are you serious? Would you do it? It's a small, I said, would I do it? I said, yes, I would love to do it. So I got to do it a couple of times and to honor Jonathan. And the last season of the Netflix series, unfortunately, I had a nice resolution to the character written, but I couldn't go up to Canada because of COVID. It would have been, I have to go into isolation up there for like 2 weeks in a little place by myself. And my granddaughter was just about to be born or one granddaughter was born. It was just, I couldn't go. So, and it was because of COVID. So that character never got to really be properly resolved in the way they had intended and wanted it to be. But it was so great to be able to just add to my catalog of work that I got to be Dr. Smith in the new Lost in Space.
Now, music is a big part of your life, and maybe not a lot of your diehard Lost in Space fans know that you have another life. Your talents are vast. And I mean, you've written songs, you've performed songs with the likes of America, with Shaun Cassidy's band, Rick Springfield. How did music first enter your showbiz sphere?
Oh, it's always been a major part of my life. And, I think Will Robinson plays guitar in 6 or 7 episodes of Lost in Space, 5 or 6, a couple where he's singing whole songs and others where he's just strumming a little bit. But after I had done 3 episodes of the Ozzie and Harriet show that Ricky Nelson starred in.
Yep.
And in that series, at the end of most every episode, Rick and his band, featuring the great James Burton on Telecaster, Rick and his band would perform a song. Now, of course, they were lip syncing to a pre-recorded track, but I was there when they were doing that, and it was loud and it was great. And I started taking guitar lessons right after I worked on the Ozzie and Harriet shows. And from that point on, music has been my driving passion. It's not like they don't conflict. It's not like you can't act and write a song, right? So in terms of people out there, you can go, there's a lot of Bill Mumy albums and there's a lot of bands that I've been a part of. And here's a brand new album that's not out yet, but it'll be out in a couple. It's Gully. It's me and my old partner, Paul Gordon, who's a Broadway composer and a Tony-nominated artist who's written a bunch of #1 songs. And he and I returned to some songs that we had originally written or partially written when we were kids, like young teenagers. And we thought those songs had such naivete and a real honest, fresh, perspective. But some of these parts were stupid. So we said, wait, well, let's go back to those songs and throw out the stupid parts and write new bridges or some new lyrics and finish those songs and record them correctly after a half a century of professional musicianship. So this is a really interesting melding of old and new put together in the same material. I'm very happy with this record, and I know Paul is too. And he and I are writing a musical right now, intended for Broadway. We'll see what happens in a year or two.
There are so many dimensions to you, so many wonderful layers to your talents, including author to Bill Mumy, because you have a book out now. It's a 400-page extravaganza. I have to say it's one of the best books I've read.
Well, as fate would have it, my book is currently available, and this is what it looks like. It looks different inside because there's a lot of words. There's also like 250 photographs that cover many eras of the golden age of showbiz. So I hope you dig it.
You were talking before, and of course you write about this in your book too, some of the really amazing people you've been blessed to work with. And might I say, it goes the other way. They've been blessed to work with you. But Jimmy Stewart is somebody you admired absolutely enormously. You starred in Dear Bridget together with Bridget Bardot. Tell me about the Jimmy Stewart you got to know.
Jimmy Stewart, with all respect to Jonathan Harris, was the greatest guy I ever worked with as an actor, and very probably the greatest guy I ever experienced as a man, as a human being, as a gentleman, as he. Now, look, I had worked for 5 years before I did Dear Bridget with Mr. Stewart, and I had worked with a lot of iconic people, and I had learned a lot about how to work as an actor. I was no, I knew what I was doing, but his the example that he showed of how everyone on a production, everyone on the crew is like a member in an orchestra. And perhaps you're the solo violinist taking an incredibly difficult solo in a classical piece. And maybe you're just a guy about to hit a triangle a few times, ding, right? But you are all part of the whole. And it takes everybody to groove together with respect to do it right. Mm-hmm. And he treated everyone on the crew with such respect. He was never for a second fabulous. He was never like, don't call me out of my trailer unless you're ready to shoot. Now that I've seen that a lot in my life. And I can't even say I think that's a terrible, that's not a tantrum. That's like saying, hey, when you're ready for me, be ready for me. I'm not that guy, but I'm just saying Jimmy Stewart would just sit in his chair next to the camera, wait for the shot to be ready, talk to everybody. There was no like, I'm in character, I can't talk to you. There was none of that stuff. He was a fabulous actor. I don't need to, doesn't need me to validate that. But one of the things that I picked up a little deeper while working with him, opposite him, was the ability as a character to really listen to other people.
Yes.
Really, really listen to what, because he was so great at that. And I can't say that I recall a specific conversation that we might have had about it, but I know that I turned a little bit in my talent. I don't know what the word is there, but I turned a little bit to understand more. Yeah, I know what my line's going to be. And I kind of know how I'm going to say it unless the director tells me to say it differently, right? I kind of prepped and I know what that's going to be. But it's going to be much better if I'm really listening to what he's saying, or what Glynis Johns is saying, or what Bridget Bardot or anybody else is saying. It's not like I wasn't aware of listening or all that stuff, but it changed. It went up a whole different notch after that. And that was just something I got from working with him. And he was a real gentleman, and he was a real hero, and a classy man who was sweet. And he and I tossed a baseball around for 12 weeks. My mom and dad went with me, both of them. My parents went with me to France when we shot the scenes in France, and to Northern California, to Sausalito, when we shot the parts of the show that were in Sausalito. So I didn't need a surrogate father. My father and I had a real good relationship, right? But because our characters were father and son, Jimmy Stewart made a lot of time to toss a ball around with me.
Yes.
Talk about the Dodgers, talk about comic books, whatever it might be. But we developed this father and son energy And
Yes.
again, it's not surrogate to my own family, but it was a very special bonding. And that was a gift from him to me.
Now, speaking of great stars, Bill, you worked alongside Steve McQueen and Dustin Hoffman in a 70s prisoner thriller, Papillon. And I know you write about this in your book, so you might not wish to share too much, but Steve McQueen, an interesting character, shall we say?
Very interesting, multifaceted, impressive, and dark. He was a dark guy. And my experiences of working on Papillon, which we filmed in Europe and in Jamaica in 1973, opened the book. The book segues through time. It's not a linear story. It takes you from era to era in jumping ways, the way memory does to me in life in general. But the Papillon story about McQueen and Dustin opened the book, and it's heavy.
What was it like writing that book? For you, was it like this amazing roller coaster because you got to relive so many amazing areas of your very long and very busy career?
I had resisted doing it for a long time. It had been suggested to me many times over the years, and I'd resisted it, or maybe it had resisted me, right? But here we were in lockdown, and I was home, and someone suggested maybe I should revisit thinking about doing that. I remember the moment when I thought, it doesn't have to be, and then I, right? And that was a liberating understanding for me. So every day for about 5.5 months, I was in my studio and I was writing. And some days I might have wanted to write about Lost in Space, and other days I might have wanted to write about an musical experience with Ringo that happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago. There was no linear force to me feeling like I had to do it in any kind of sequential order. And at the end of most of these sessions, I would ask my wife, Eileen, to read what I had written that day. And we've been together over 40 years. She knows me better than anybody. And what was so nice about it is, besides being a bit of an editor, and Eileen would say to me, well, what about that story about? And I'd go, oh, she'd like say, what about that time your dad stole your bike back? And I go, oh, I totally forgot about that. Oh, thank you. And I'd go run back and write these things in increments. And then it was like putting a quilt together. Then it was assembling them in an order that I felt flowed properly. And I got some feedback from the publisher. And actually, I got some very good notes from Shaun Cassidy. Shaun's an excellent writer, and he's been a producer on television for many years. And he always has asked me from the beginning, he's always asked me to read his first drafts of things and give him notes, which I have always done. So I returned the favor and said, hey, here's a rough draft of my book. Can you give me some notes, some help? And he did. He was very helpful. And it was because of Shaun that actually the book opens the way it does. He said, Mumy, I really like what you got going here, but do not open a book by saying, I came into this world on this day. He goes, no, not like that. He goes, open with a bam. He goes, open the book with something that'll really capture the audience. And so I chose the Papillon story, and that was a note from Shaun.
What I love about your book, Bill, it's like sitting with an old friend, maybe over lunch, and just hearing these wonderful stories. And that's a real art.
I tried very hard to write it in my own conversational tone. I didn't want to be haughty, and I didn't want to be clinical. I wanted it to sound like it was a conversation. So I'm if that's successful, then that's good.
Now, you referenced your wife, your lovely wife, Eileen. Since 1986, you've been married. And I know there is a really fabulous story as to how you two met.
I was playing a gig with my band at a club in Studio City, and a close friend of mine a wonderful singer named Sarah Taylor, was living in an apartment building, and Eileen was living in the apartment building with her. And I had just come out of a long 4-year relationship, and I was single, and Sarah brought Eileen to my gig. And Eileen and I, this was 1978. And Eileen and I met, no, 79, I'm sorry, 79. Yeah. And Eileen and I met, and there was I guess, a mutual attraction, but we began this weird telephone relationship where I would call her kind of late at night. We were in our 20s. I would call her kind of late at night, and we would talk on the phone for hours and hours. And eventually, we were having a conversation one night. We were having a conversation one night late at night, and it was like 2 a.m, and she said, well, you know, I've got to be at this shoe show tomorrow downtown. I'm modeling shoes at this shoe show. And I said, oh my God, I'm sorry I've kept you up so late. I said, I have to go downtown tomorrow because I have to get a permit for a retaining wall. And she said to me, well, I'll be downtown. I think I can get the permit for you. And I was like, what? She goes, I'll go to the building permit place and I'll pull the permit for you. And I thought, why would anybody do that, right? Why? But the bottom line is she went to the building permit place, she got the permit, she came here, and she's been here ever since. She got the permit, and here we are. And we bicker, she and I bicker, but we're pretty solid.
And heck, you're married in Hawaii, you're a dad of 2 kids, you're a granddad. I mean, how good is that?
It's real good.
And so is your book, Bill. And I want to say, if anybody would like an autographed copy of your book, you are very gracious. You're very happy to sign your life away in terms of an autograph. And there is a website, and that is what you can click on. And that's where you'll find the book. You'll then oblige with autographs for fans all around the world, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I have definitely signed books that have gone all over the world this time around. And that's a nice compliment. And I just hope people dig it, and I appreciate everything you've brought to this project, Craig. Thank you.
Oh, Bill, look, it's a joy. It's really lovely to chat with you. You are brimming with so many stories, and I thank you so very much for sharing some of them.
Well, cheers, Craig. Thank you very much, and I'm sure hoping we'll do this again sometime.